Welcome, restless souls, to Carmen's Crypt. I'm Carmen Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carmen's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes alive. This is Carmen's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. The Burger Barn wasn't Shayleen's first choice, not even close. But when you're 18, kicked out of your mom's house because of her new boyfriend's space issues, and trying to finish your senior year while living in your car, you take what you can get. She had been sleeping in the Walmart parking lot for 2 weeks when she saw the now hiring sign in the Burger Barn window. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Janet, hired her on the spot. Maybe it was the way Shayleen's band t-shirt hung loose on her frame, or how she couldn't stop staring at the heating lamps above the fry station. Either way, Janet didn't ask too many questions about the gap in her resume, or why she needed her checks in cash. In fact, Shayleen could have sworn she saw something like satisfaction flicker across Janet's face when she mentioned she had no local family. "Perfect," Janet had said, in a tone that should have been Shayleen's first warning. "You can start tonight." The job came with perks that meant more to Shayleen than anyone knew. A free meal per shift, access to a clean bathroom with a lock. The night shift meant she could park her beat-up Honda Civic behind the restaurant instead of the Walmart lot, where security had started recognizing her. Most importantly, the constant hum of the kitchen equipment drowned out the silence that filled her life since Mom's boyfriend Mark had changed the locks. Her co-workers didn't know about her situation. She had gotten good at hiding it, washing her uniform in the sink after closing, keeping her textbooks and changes of clothes neatly organized in her trunk, using the YMCA showers before school. She told everyone she was saving up for college, which wasn't entirely a lie. The acceptance letter from state was still crumpled in her glove compartment, along with a financial aid form she couldn't complete without her mom's tax information. The night shift was her favorite. Less interaction, more peace. She developed a routine: homework during the slow periods, extra cleaning to stay busy, careful rationing of her free meal to make it last. The fluorescent lights and soft whir of machines had become more homey than any place she had lived in the past few years. That's why, when Martin called in sick that night, she didn't mind staying alone. The Burger Barn had become her sanctuary. She knew every corner, every sound, every rhythm of the place. It felt safe. She didn't notice how quickly Janet had offered to let her close alone. "You've been here 3 weeks exactly," Janet had said, checking something in her calendar. "I think you're ready." There was an odd gleam in her eyes, something Shayleen mistook for pride. She should have remembered that feeling safe is what got you hurt. That's what her mom used to say, before Mark, before she stopped saying anything that might upset him. Maybe if Shayleen hadn't gotten so comfortable, she would have noticed sooner that something was wrong with the night shift. Maybe she would have asked why they went through so many closers, or why Janet had waited to let her be alone on the shift at exactly the 3-week mark, just like she had with Kyle before he quit suddenly, without notice, no call, no show, like Martin had mentioned happened to Daria before him. Maybe she would have wondered about the strange, greasy stains that never seemed to come clean, no matter how hard she scrubbed. or why Janet insisted on personally cleaning the grease traps every month, always on the night after someone's 3-week anniversary at the restaurant. The first hour of her solo shift was peaceful. She cleaned the shake machine, counted the register, and watched TikToks to pass the time. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the gentle whir of the heating lamps kept her company. Then the speaker crackled to life. "Welcome to Burger Barn. May I take your order?" Silence, just static on the line. Shayleen peered through the drive-thru window. The lane was empty, but the sensor light was on, indicating a vehicle was present. "Hello? Is anyone there?" A voice came through, distorted and barely audible.
"I'd like to come inside."
The words hung in the static-filled silence. Something about the cadence was wrong, as if the speaker had learned English by reading rather than hearing it. "I'm sorry, we're drive-thru only after 10 p.m., she replied automatically, glancing again at the empty lane. "What can I get you from our menu?" The speaker crackled, emitting a sound like fingernails dragging across wet glass before the voice returned.
"It's so quiet in here,"
the voice whispered.
"So empty, like the spaces between your thoughts."
A pause. Shayleen's finger hovered over the talk button.
"I can hear you breathing."
The voice continued, now sounding somehow closer, as if the speaker had pressed against the microphone.
"It's been so long since I heard breathing, since I felt warm."
The last word lingered, stretched out unnaturally. It distorted into something that wasn't quite language anymore. The voice didn't sound right. It had a wet quality to it, like someone talking through a mouthful of liquid. The sensor light was still on, but she couldn't see any car. "Sir, if you're not going to order..."
"I can smell you from here,"
the voice interrupted.
"Young, fresh, just like the others."
Her blood ran cold. "Others?"
"The ones who worked the late shift alone. They all let me in eventually."
Shayleen looked at the security cameras. The drive-thru lane was still empty, but the sensor light remained on. And now she could hear something. A soft, wet sliding sound, getting closer to the window. That's when she noticed the trail. In the dim light, something dark and glistening was oozing along the concrete, moving toward the window. It looked like grease. Old, rancid grease from the fryers. But it was moving on its own, forming shapes that reminded her of hands and faces. Her phone was dead. The landline gave no dial tone. The back door was locked. Martin had the key. The thing outside reached the window. The glass began to fog up, but not from the cold. This condensation was yellow-brown, thick and putrid. Through it, she could see faces pressing against the glass. Faces she recognized from the employee photos on the break room wall. Missing employees, all from the late shift. The window's seal began to bubble and dissolve. The speaker crackled one last time.
"Don't worry, your shift is almost over, and then you'll never be alone again."
She could hear the lock on the window starting to give way. Shayleen backed away from the drive-thru window, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The faces pressed against the glass weren't just pressing anymore. They were melting through, features contorting in hungry anticipation. Their mouths opened in silent screams, revealing not teeth, but dark, glistening voids that seemed to pull at her. "Janet?" she whispered, recognizing the shift manager's face among the melting visages. "Martin?" Another face bubbled to the surface, eyes rolling wildly before being subsumed back into the mass. The window's lock bulged inward, metal warping as if being digested. It wouldn't hold much longer. Shayleen stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of ketchup packets. The small plastic squares skittered across the floor, and the mass at the window pulsed eagerly at the noise. It was responding to her movements, hunting her. She sprinted to the kitchen, shoes squeaking against the tile. The sound of wet suction followed her. Like someone pulling their foot from deep mud, only faster, gaining on her. In the kitchen, fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting jerky shadows that made it hard to distinguish between normal kitchen equipment and possible threats. Was that movement by the fryer, or just her panicked imagination? The grease trap near the floor gave a gurgling belch. A bubble rose to its surface, popped, and released a foul stench. Something inside was moving. Frantically, Shayleen searched for anything that might help. Her eyes fell on the industrial-sized container of salt they used for their fries. She remembered something her grandmother used to say about salt repelling evil spirits. A half-remembered conversation from childhood when she'd asked why they threw salt over their shoulders. Worth a shot. Back at the front, the window lock gave way with a wet pop that sounded obscenely organic. The greasy mass began to seep through the crack, bringing with it an overpowering stench of rancid oil and something else. The sickly sweet smell of decomposition, like roadkill left in the sun. The first tendril that pushed through the opening was about the thickness of a finger, glossy black with streaks of yellow. It quested blindly along the counter, leaving a trail of slime that sizzled slightly against the laminate. "Back!" Shayleen screamed, slinging a handful of salt at the intruding appendage. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The grease thing emitted a high-pitched keening sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The tendril hissed and recoiled, parts of it hardening and crumbling away like candle wax exposed to extreme cold. The severed piece that remained inside thrashed wildly before dissolving into a foul-smelling puddle. Emboldened, she poured more salt along the windowsill, creating a barrier. The smell of cooking flesh intensified, like bacon left too long on a hot skillet, but underlaid with the stench of putrefaction. The creature writhed outside, multiple faces rising and falling within its mass, like drowning swimmers fighting to breach the surface. One face, she thought it might be Kyle, who had quit last month without notice, pressed forward, its features more distinct than the others. Its mouth opened, but the voice that emerged from the speaker didn't match the movement of its lips.
"You think you're clever?"
The wet voice gurgled, several octaves too deep for Kyle's teenage tenor.
"But you can't stay in there forever. The morning crew won't conquer ours, and we're so hungry, so very hungry."
As if to emphasize the point, something heavy slammed against the front door, rattling it in its frame. The security lights outside flickered and died, plunging the parking lot into darkness. Only the glow from inside the restaurant illuminated the scene now, creating a fishbowl effect. Shayleen, trapped inside a bright bubble, with the darkness pressing in from all sides. The salt was working, but it wasn't a solution. Shayleen's mind raced. Salt worked, but she didn't have enough to barricade every entrance. What else would affect grease? She remembered the constant reminders during training about grease fires. Never use water. Always use the special extinguishers. Her gaze landed on the industrial soap dispenser by the sink, then flicked to the maintenance checklist hanging nearby. One item highlighted in yellow. Clean grease traps. Chemistry had always been her best subject. Soap and grease, saponification, breaking down fats, making them water-soluble. A plan began to form. She grabbed the soap container and the emergency fire extinguisher from the wall. If she could create a mixture strong enough, maybe she could do more than just keep this thing out. Maybe she could destroy it. The wet sliding sounds surrounded the building now, a chorus of hungry, organic noises. The front door rattled more violently. The lights in the restaurant flickered once, twice. Through the windows, she could see the darkness outside moving, coalescing, probing for weaknesses. Dark ooze began to seep under the back entrance door, forming a widening puddle that reflected the fluorescent lights in nauseating rainbow patterns. They were trying to find a way in, all ways at once.
I would ease your passing,
the voice crooned through the speakers, no longer trying to sound human.
the other spot. It only made their absorption more prolonged.
Working quickly, her hands trembling so badly she spilled half the materials, Shayleen mixed the industrial degreaser with baking soda from the storeroom and loaded the mixture into the empty fire extinguisher, a makeshift weapon against whatever these things were. As she worked, her mind pieced things together. The constant employee turnover, Janet's insistence that no one close alone until they'd been there 3 weeks, the strange stains, the grease traps that needed cleaning more often than they should. The burger barn wasn't just a restaurant. It was a feeding trough, a lure. The front door's lock gave way with a wet crack that sounded disturbingly like a breaking bone. The door swung open slowly, revealing not the parking lot, but a wall of undulating semi-solid darkness. Within it, dozens of faces pressed forward. Some she recognized, others strangers, all sharing the same hungry expression. And there, at the front of the mass, but still separate from it, stood Janet. "You should have just let it take you," Janet said, her voice flat. Her eyes reflected the fluorescent lights like an animal's caught in headlights. It would have been quick, easier than what happened to the others who fought. "You knew?" Shayleen breathed. "All this time." Janet's face hardened. "I made a deal 20 years ago when I was the night shift worker. 1 soul every month. And it lets the rest of us live. Nothing personal, Shayleen. You just fit the profile. No family to look for you. No permanent address. The kind of kid who could vanish without questions." Behind Janet, the mass began to pour inward like molasses, spreading across the floor in a wave that consumed everything it touched. The entrance mats, a fallen napkin dispenser, all were enveloped and drawn into the central mass, which grew larger with each absorption. "How many?" Shayleen asked, backing away. "How many people have you fed to this thing?" "Fewer than would have died if I'd let it roam free," Janet replied, a tremor finally breaking through her calculated coldness. "It needs to feed one way or another. She gestured helplessly. "I just choose who." Shayleen raised her improvised weapon, her back pressed against the counter. The greasy tide approached from all sides now, hurting her toward the center of the restaurant. "You don't have to die tonight," Janice said quietly. "It's me or you. But it doesn't have to be you. Take my place. 20 years managing this place, selecting the offerings. The pay is good. The hours are regular. It's not a bad life. And all I have to do is murder people." Shayleen spat. "Only 1 a month," Janet said, as if that made it reasonable. "Only people who won't be missed. You're good at spotting them. You've lived it. You know the signs." A tendril shot forward, faster than the rest, aiming for Janet's ankle. For a moment, panic flashed across the woman's face. "It's getting impatient," she hissed. "Decide now." 5 years later, I still wake up sweating, the smell of rancid grease in my nostrils. The therapists say it's PTSD, that what I experienced that night was a stress-induced hallucination brought on by homelessness, malnutrition, and exhaustion. Maybe they're right. It would be easier if they were. The official report says I had a breakdown and trashed the Burger Barn location, covering it with salt, soap, and fire extinguisher foam, before being found in the walk-in freezer. They found me the next morning, severely hypothermic but alive. What the report doesn't explain is why they found Janet's employee badge and car keys on the floor, but no Janet, or why Martin never came back to work, or why corporate closed that location a month later, citing structural issues and transferring all remaining staff to other locations. It doesn't explain the wet sliding marks they found throughout the restaurant, or why 3 employees from that location were still listed as missing persons. And it definitely doesn't explain why, when they demolished the building a year later, the construction crew found human remains in the grease traps, remains that were strangely incomplete, as if parts had been dissolved. I've thought often about Janet's offer, about the choice she presented me, the easy way out, becoming the new caretaker, the new supplier of souls. I'd like to say I refused on moral grounds, that I would never sacrifice others to save myself. But the truth is, I didn't have time to answer. When I fired my makeshift chemical weapon at the mass, it reacted with a violent explosion of foam and caustic spray. In the chaos, the creature seized Janet instead. Whether out of rage at her failure or simple opportunism, I'll never know. Her scream as she was pulled into the mass still echoes in my nightmares. I don't work in fast food anymore. The scholarship from state came through after my story made the local news. Social services found my mom, got me the tax forms I needed. My college counselor helped me file for emancipation. I'm studying chemical engineering now, specializing in bioremediation, the science of using chemicals to break down toxic substances. My professors think I'm passionate about environmental cleanup. They don't know I'm researching something specific, something that can dissolve human flesh and take on its properties, something that can think and hunger and wait. Because I know what I saw that night, and I know they're still out there. Those grease things with the faces of missing workers, waiting in 24-hour drive-thrus, hiding in the dark corners of all-night diners. I know, because sometimes driving past fast food restaurants late at night, I see the employees through the windows. And sometimes, just sometimes, their faces shimmer and shift in the fluorescent light, becoming something else entirely before solidifying again. They're waiting for someone else who's alone, someone else who needs the job badly enough to not ask questions, someone else who thinks they've found sanctuary in the humming lights and whirring machines. So if you're working the late shift and you hear the drive-through speaker crackle to life when there's no car in sight, remember my story. And whatever you do, don't let them in. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carmen's crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed. And remember, in Carmen's crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.